all for coming. I really sincerely mean that. And if we can just go around, Rose, starting with you, just we'll do the names, and then we're gonna let you guys go. So your name?
My name is...
It was Rose.
It's Rose, but my family knows me as Rose Marie.
There you go.
And my maiden name is Naka, and my marriage name is Bradley.
Excellent, excellent.
My name is Carolyn Morris, and my mom was a Salemme.
My name is Pat Jolly, and I'm one of the Salemmes.
My name is James W. Wiesenberg, and I'm a newbie here. I've only been here 50 years, but I was adopted by everyone.
Good, good.
I'm Jim Morris, Carolyn's husband, and I'm really a newbie, even though we've been married for 52 years.
There you go. Congratulations.
I'm Gary Salemme, and
You've been here a while.
I grew up on Salemme Lane.
Tom Salemme.
I'm Louis Jolly, Patty Salemme's husband.
Okay. So let's get it started. Let's go back to the farms. That's the best part. Who's got a good beginning? The Salemme farm, what did you do?
Pick strawberries
Raspberries.
and raspberries.
One of the
And
largest raspberry
we-
growers.
Yep, we
in the
would
state.
pick them,
Yeah.
and then Nonnie would have us sell it on the street. And we were little, my brother and I used to do it, and he was probably 4, I was maybe 6, 7, somewhere around there, and we were little towheads. So everybody stopped because there was these little towheads selling strawberries and raspberries. And for every pint or whatever that Nonnie would pack, whatever one we sold, we would keep 1 penny. And that was a lot for us. Well, they progressed, each generation got a little bit more money.
And his father, your father and Joe used to go to the market, though, didn't
Oh,
they?
they all
go?
went to the market.
My dad never did.
Oh, I
No,
see.
my dad,
Yeah.
and my mom was a Salemme.
I see, okay.
Well, just a little bit of a backdrop. Our grandfather and grandmother came from 2 small towns outside of Naples, San Prisco and Santa Maria. And they came around 1895, 1896. There's a lot we don't know. I don't know if anybody knows, did they know each other before they came over? I don't know. Or met here. But they got married in St. Michael's Church in New Haven. And, you know, like a lot of the Italians, for instance, from Amalfi, settled in New Haven, but they came from these 2 small towns. And I don't ever remember hearing or meeting anybody else from these 2 small towns. So there's a lot of history, a lot of it that's missing. But from what I can tell, they were, and I looked at like the 1910 census, one of the earliest Italians in Orange. And that's when they started farming, the Farinas and the Salemmes.
And you were on top of Marsh Hill?
Yes.
Okay.
Which was, in those days, it was higher. The hill was higher than it is now.
Yeah.
They kind of leveled it down.
Darn erosion.
Yeah, right.
And so, and you did this, you said the strawberries, and you also did raspberries, which are tough crops to
Yeah.
To grow. They're very-
When you're little, you don't think of that when you're out there picking.
So you were all produce, you all did like seasonal produce?
Truck farm.
Okay.
Yep, go down to the market,
Okay.
the old market, which is, you know, like around Prince Street right now. But yeah, they used to, you know, get on the truck and go down there. And my grandmother had a hard time with my grandfather because he was very soft-hearted. And, you know, it was during the Depression, and people would come, hey, Kim, all right, take it, take it. And he'd come home with not so much money. My grandmother didn't like that. She was a lot of people called her a wonderful woman. Some of the family members called her a Wonder Woman. She was just stirred everything, got everything going, maintained everything. Out in the fields with the kids. She was incredible.
That's great, real matriarch.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, my father used to tell me when they were kids, my grandmother would be hoeing with a whole field of tomatoes, telling the stories from the old country. And she'd go real quick, and if they wanted to hear the story, they had to keep up with her.
That was when we get it done.
Keep getting the hoeing done fast.
Method behind her nose.
Yeah.
That's great.
That is.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
Do you remember when we used to do the tomatoes?
Yes.
Oh, do you remember the tomato fights we would have? Oh, Noni would get so mad. They had the galvanized
At the
pan, the big pan with the
Fire underneath.
fire underneath, and all the girls would be there, and they'd put the tomatoes in, and they'd be peeling, they'd be hot tomatoes. When you peel the skin off, and oh, I used to think that was the coolest thing, but it was so hot, hot, hot. You pick it up, and it was so hot. I remember I hit Tommy right beside the
We still have to talk about that.
And Noni, because her English was very poor and very broken, and she just looked at me and go, pest, 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 you pest, you pest.
Well, in the old days, nobody had cameras. I mean, it was, you know, it was hard life. So there's no pictures of the front of the farmhouse. But a couple of years ago, an artist sort of took some composites and painted this. You can keep this.
Is that the front?
That's
The
back.
front, the back, the back.
Oh,
Yeah, we have nothing about that. Yeah.
I got a picture of
We'll have to scan
Phyllis
that.
and I sitting on the back porch.
The back.
The
We
back.
all have pictures of the back.
Oh, no, because I don't even think the front door opened.
No, because the plants, there was so many plants in that porch.
Never went through the
No,
front door.
and you couldn't get through it because Noni had massive amount of plants. It was just, they went up to the ceiling and there was no room to walk. I don't know how she watered them because they were healthy, beautiful plants. I don't know.
Oh, grandmother could grow anything.
Yes.
I remember she grew a peach tree from peach pits and got a tree. And our last day of school, well, before that, we went and we got a whole bunch of flowers to bring to our teachers, because she had the most gorgeous flower garden.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I didn't take after her.
Remember, she had that huge snowball plant
Oh.
on the side of the house,
Wasn't
which
it?
was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it was as big as a wall, as big as that
Oh.
wall. And we'd always take our family pictures in front of it.
That's,
Yes.
And it
that's
was
what I
great
had, all
because
those
we had such a
pictures
big
of
family.
them.
There were 13 children.
Wow.
And so, and then all of their children. So there were so many people that we just fit right in front of that plant beautifully. It was just like a backdrop that was made for us, you know?
Oh, that was beautiful.
Those are the only pictures I could come up with, all those pictures in front of the bush.
Yeah.
And I can remember the two of us in front of that bush, cutting those flowers and pretending we were brides.
Oh,
Yes, and we would cut some flowers, and we
Right.
were young, and we thought, you know, this is cool. We got these beautiful flowers, and we would pretend that we were
But it's
brides,
a
and
good
we
thing.
walked down the aisle. You don't remember that?
I don't.
No. I remember
So
doing
did you use any in the wedding bouquets when you did get married?
that.
What I do remember is I always remember being very interested in the plane that one of my uncles had in the barn, because they had the barns with, you know, the animals and this and that, and then there was this barn and this big airplane in it that he would get in and take off, and I always wanted to have a ride. I never did.
Oh,
but-
I did.
Did you?
Yeah, and the door, there was no door.
Well, I remember him flying over the farm.
What was his name?
Yeah.
Ralph.
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 The plane with no door?
I couldn't see, I mean, which way?
Where did you take off from?
I don't
Was it
remember.
red or yellow? Red or yellow? Red. Red.
All I remember is no door.
Well, was it the airport in West Haven? Was that where you, was it West Haven?
What did they?
No.
Yeah,
Where's that other small airport?
There's one in Bethany.
Milford?
Bethany? Might have been Bethany. I don't know.
Because I know we videotaped flying over the Merritt Parkway.
Oh, funny.
Awesome.
I don't know, I remember hanging on for dear life.
I think so.
My introduction began many decades ago. This is from 1958. This is my first experience of the farm, the Priscilla farm. My aunt had taken me, and this is my first experience learning what it was to be a millionaire with a big tomato crop and tomato sandwiches. They had the Priscillas down along the river there, they had a jar of Hellman's mayonnaise in the creek, very cold, and they had 2 loaves of Wonder Bread in an old bread basket, what do they call it, bread box? It was, I guess,
Oh, yeah,
a bread
right.
box.
Yep,
Yeah,
the
everybody had
box,
that.
yeah.
And you're talking about throwing tomatoes. I got in my first tomato fight. But I went along that river because they told me anything was possible here, and I found arrowheads.
Oh, sure, oh, sure.
And it's interesting because later on, with the arrowheads that I had found, Junie Farina, Dominic, as we call him Junie, he talked about when they had plowed, they would find arrowheads. And when they were young, they would put sticks on them and play cowboys and Indians. So I had found 5 that are almost perfect.
Very nice.
And this is the same bag from 1958. But what happened with the tomatoes, I mean, it was a glorious day, obviously. And how I found this, getting ready for today, I just was looking for an article that was done for all the meetings we had had over the last 30 years, the Thursday meetings. And this was in a drawer, and I hadn't touched it for many, many years. But this is the same, I think it's a greased bag. So this is what started it. But I remember because Freddie Pasillo, there was Freddie, there was Lee, Freddie, and Frank. And Freddie Pasillo was down there with Lee, and they were getting tomatoes. But then a tomato fight started. And it was like, afterwards, because we were covered with tomatoes, and at 5 years old, I remember it was like, this is the greatest thing. I found arrowheads, and we had a tomato fight, and no one's yelling, this is great. And then we had tomato sandwiches. I still have tomato sandwiches, and what it was, you slice that big, juicy tomato, put it on the Wonder Bread, and they still make Wonder Bread, and then slab all you could the Helmer's mayonnaise, put the top on, and it was great. It was great. And that's how I got introduced many years ago to the Pasillo farm, which was a dairy farm. And I guess everybody came there for their milk, for their family. You must remember that.
Yeah.
And we do have some things in the orange. What is that, the museum? Orange?
Yeah, the museum, the agricultural museum.
Agriculture Museum of Freddie's original tractor. And also his, what I remember, the great stories about the ice cutter, because they had to keep the milk cool. So when the ice came on Indian Lake, they would cut it. I guess it was called Rose's Milk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember his mother and his father, because when I found this, Cotillo Pasillo, and he's in the book on the history of Orange, you'll see him, 1910, sitting in front of a, I think it was a Model T. But I said, these are yours, he goes, no, you can have them. So I was it. It was good. So it's interesting that I should find these in a drawer.
I think oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
No, we didn't mention that 5 sons of the family were in the armed services. And my father, Patty, Gary's father. And if you're on Interstate 95 and you're going through exit 41, if you look to the side, it says Salemme Memorial Bridge. And that's in honor of the sons who served in the armed services, and including our Uncle Dominic, who was a glider pilot and was killed during the Normandy invasion.
I think a lot of people in Orange have a lot of history in all the different wars that went on. I mean, all the way back from the Civil War and so on. And it is nice that there's plaques, there's memorials and whatnot, because I think these people really need to be recognized.
Yeah.
So that is really nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good, good, good. So when you were up there and with all the farms and stuff, now we talked about the roads, but the big road that happened was 95 going in. And so how did that disrupt? And it did disrupt the farms.
I still remember the day they burned down our grandparents' house.
Whoa.
They didn't knock it down, they burned it down.
Oh, gee.
And I remember my father getting in the car and just taking a left out of Salemme Lane and going into Milford. He couldn't watch.
Sure. Oh.
Did they burn down the barn as well?
I think
Everything was burned
I don't know
down?
if they burned the barn, did they, Bill?
I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I know the house went up.
I didn't even know they burned it.
Yeah.
I just saw they knocked it
I saw it
down.
burn.
Wow.
And it was eminent domain.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
So there wasn't really
It was
much
in
time
court
for
for a
anyone
year.
to get stuff out. And where did they take the stuff from? stuff to what place? What do you do with the stuff?
So that was the end of the farm.
Well, yeah, I mean, the farm really stopped functioning
About
shortly after.
48.
Yeah,
I think my father said the last time they tried to make a go of it was 48.
right, and the blight, the tomato blight wiped out like every single tomato plant. They said we didn't even have enough to pick and eat.
Yep. Do you remember when 95 was being built and you had to go down where they had dug out and up the road? You couldn't get it, because they dug out
Right,
that space.
yep.
So you had to go down Marshall Road, then it went down in, and then it came back up, because there's no bridge there yet.
Yeah. So it was a big effect.
Wow.
Yeah, the 95 had a big impact.
Yeah.
I mean, before that, you just wait for a car to come down Marshall Road. Right, you wait 15 minutes.
Do you remember when
They were on Salemme Lane.
the Freenas put in the first greenhouse, and they developed the first irrigation system that was really sold to many, many farmers, but they would start the plants. And I remember Junie had said that it was 90 feet originally, and then that road that's
Well,
there
when they
now,
sold the back lot for the trucking terminal,
so they had to have
they had the
easement with that
easement
road.
with the road.
So that's when they shortened
they
it.
cut it in half.
But it was a furnace-based,
Right.
radiator-controlled, heated greenhouse that started many of the local farmers' flowers and their vegetables as well. And with the irrigation system, because they had hooked up, one longer is like perpetual motion. If Frank Vasilla was here, he'd show you his collection. But it continuously goes on this boom, 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 and pumps whatever you have hooked up to it, or will turn whatever you have hooked up to it. And they had set up an irrigation system so that they would have the maximum yield. We talked about, they had a written history going back to 1822 that I read several times. And it was interesting, we had shared this earlier, that when you bought your seed, you had a lien on your property, so you really couldn't fail. And Judy had said, yeah, there was always a sense of urgency. And over the years, I would say we met for over 30 years on our Thursday meetings, where all the old farmers who were young ones were sharing so much of what we had to share. I mean, it was unbelievable, the story about this, the story about that. And one was, I guess Old Man Foyer wasn't very nice. And one Halloween, Joe Salemme and I guess Pat Richitelli and one of the Farinas took his carriage and put it on top of the barn. So the next day he was furious. So I guess the local police officer said, you're gonna have to take it down, and they did. But they're laughing now, how many decades later, it was great. We got even, it was great.
Well, some of our big excitement, remember when the pigs used to come into the yard?
The pigs and the
Oh, the
bulls.
Bacillus pigs, yeah.
And
Yeah,
Ruby's
yeah.
bulls.
Yeah.
And
Couldn't
Ruby-
get out of the house.
Trample over the strawberries.
Yeah.
I hated when they did that.
Yeah.
I remember, I was trying to remember, my mom said, nobody didn't get indoor plumbing until I was 4 or 5 years old. So that had to be 1951, 52, before she had indoor plumbing?
Could be, because when my mother was in the hospital and we stayed with grandmother, we had an outhouse
Yeah.
and a well,
Yeah.
which I couldn't even go near because I don't like to look down.
Oh, sure, an open well, yeah.
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 But I don't think there was indoor plumbing till 1952.
Yeah,
Wasn't
I
that
don't think so.
well in the back, off the back of the house?
the well.
Yeah, the left, I think.
Yeah, you went off the back porch and it was right there. Mm.
And Uncle Charlie's house was right next to
Yeah,
Lonnie's house.
Yeah,
It was, had
that's
a
why I got
stone
it.
front. Do
I
you
got
remember
it.
the stone front?
I got a
Uncle
call.
Charlie's? The stone front, and I remember going over there as a little one, because Uncle Charlie always had kittens. There was always tons and tons of kittens to play with.
He had other things too.
Yeah, but I like the kittens.
Oh. I remember the chickens.
Oh, I don't like the chickens. Cutting their heads off. My mother would say,
Jenny did it.
oh, my mother hated that.
Our cousin Jenny
Yeah.
did it, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Mommy would go over there, and Uncle Charlie said, well, if you want a chicken, you gotta cut off the head. My mother said, I don't want a chicken. But she would
Jenny,
get it
yeah,
cut.
Jenny, she was,
Yeah.
what was she?
Oh,
10, 11, 12, whatever.
she just whacked that head, huh? Oh,
And Uncle Charlie didn't get indoor plumbing for a number of years after
I
that.
don't even remember.
Yeah, because I, playing outside, and I'm over at Uncle Charlie's house, and of course, you know, you're a little kid, you're running around, you hold it for so long, how you hold it, and I ran in the house, and I sit down, Rose, can I gotta go pee-pee? A typical 5-year-old. And upstairs, and I go upstairs, and I'm looking, there's no, where's the bathroom? Where's the bathroom? I come running downstairs, where's the bathroom? I can't find the bathroom, you know, I can't find the bathroom. Up to the top of the stairs. There's nothing up there. There's a chair. That's the potty. Oh, no, I'll go back over Naughty's and use a bathroom, because I didn't know what a potty, there's chair.
Well, like you said, 1950,
Two.
I was a teenager when she got a bathroom, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, up at the top of the stairs, there's a chair.
No, well, we went out to the outhouse, yeah. And here, I was 9, Phyllis was 5, yeah, 5. And Grandma was taking care of us while my mother was in the hospital. Yeah, and we came from a house with a bathroom.
Yeah, we had a bathroom
Yeah, we
in
had a
Milford,
bathroom.
and then I go visit Uncle Charlie and Aunt Rose, and there's this chair at the top of the stairs. They said, oh, this isn't not gonna work. When you're a little kid, you don't understand that.
especially some of those cold mornings, too.
And my cousin Phyllis said she had a wonderful childhood.
I think back then was a wonderful childhood for most of us. I mean, I think, you know, what the kids now are being faced with, what activity do you have to be in, what time do you have to be over here, and you gotta keep up with what the neighborhood kids are doing, and
Now,
I think
Oh,
having that land and
our
space.
childhood was great going.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in West Haven, but came to grandmother's every Sunday. And if we didn't go one Sunday, we put up a fuss. And then I had all my girlfriends that would come too. Are we going to grandma's today?
It's a
Yeah, we're just-
good thing.
We just, you know, there were so many cousins when I got there, and we just wandered around all over the place.
Oh, that's
Nobody watching us.
It is, it's good, it's good.
It's interesting, because for approximately 30 years, we would meet on Thursdays, and everybody was there. And they would talk about this seasonal round that typically would start when the Broccoli Rob was ready
Oh, yeah.
on April 15th. Well, on July 4th, without exception, Freddie Pasillo and Julie Farina would be collecting on the sheets all the seed. And that was the original seed that came from Italy. That strain of Broccoli Rob, right up until he got sick, Julie got sick, every April 15th. And so that was a big day, because who was getting 7 bunches and 5 bunches, and
Yeah.
really, yeah, it was just an exciting time. And then, of course, Judy was dealing with the eggplants and the tomatoes and so on, and he would have to harrow every day when there wasn't enough water. But I remember going sometimes on a Monday or Tuesday when I could break free, just for the stories, and I'd help around, do whatever. So tell me, what was it like? Well, when we needed clothes, the man would come with the clothes and buy the clothes, pants, whatever. And then I said, so what about school? He said, there was a time, I guess, Sobey had a store in the center of Orange.
Yeah, Scobie, yeah, yeah,
It was Scobie, and I guess he was also a teacher?
probably.
Okay, so.
Everybody had a lot of different hats.
So they talked about there's a big caper when they were in a 2nd grade, I think, and they knew he had candy. So they got out early and they got some candy and they got in trouble. It was a big scandal. But he had talked about when it came time to go to high school, the teacher had called and said, he's doing really well, he really should go, and his father said, no, he needs to work on the farm. And that was the choice that was made for him. He didn't have a choice. And then later on, he had stayed, he'd never married, and his mother was sick, and he took care of her for 8 years. And that means 2 or 3 times getting up in the middle of the night, all of that. And he never batted an eye. That's just what you do. And if you were lucky when starting the greenhouse, it was still cold. So you would go and sit there and he'd have every single calendar, all the way back to the 20s. And he was talking about trends and what he was doing with the fertilizer. And then remember we had the illegal condition of getting nitrite? Because it was the explosion, I guess, in Oklahoma. Yeah. And then they had put a law, you couldn't get it. And he was complaining that his yield on the broccoli raw just wasn't what it was anymore. So you talked about the changes, but some of the conversations, Joe Salemme had gone with his father, and his father, I guess, was easy at the market. So they would go to Joe, and Joe would say, no, it's this much. And then they'd wait and go to the father, because he didn't want to take anything back. And Joe would be so furious. But it was, terms of endearment going, and there was a story about a lady there. I don't know, there was a cigarette lady, I guess. They had like a tray, she had a tray, and would sell cigarettes. And she was always there, because they used to go to the market twice, early morning around 3, and then in the afternoon when it was in season. And apparently, they said, she's always here, when does she go home? And they said, well, they used to tip her because they felt that she wasn't making a lot of money. Well, I guess she died there at the market. She had over $20,000 in her nylons. And he said that was really quite the scandal. And I asked also about World War II, and he said, well, you could get a deferment, but he had to grow, Journey had to grow on the farm 500 turkeys. And then another year he had to grow 500 chickens. And he talked about how they had to paint the tops of the headlights in case there was an air raid or we were being attacked. And then also how there was a black market for the gas, what is it called, a gas token or a gas coupon. He said that was great. That was really great, because then you could figure out getting something else that you couldn't, especially if it was something to do with metal. And then in the back of the farm, he told me that there were some pretty incredible vehicles that were there, because during the war, you needed the metal. And apparently there were some Model Ts, and I did go back there some years ago, and they were still rotting there.
Sure.
So they had taken what they needed, but the sense of urgency and the adaptation, and I remember the impression I had early on that these have to be the smartest people. Farmers have to be. They're accountants, they're mechanics, they're dealing with a big question mark with the seasonal crops. They're getting along with everybody, and they still have to deal with the politics. And then there's also the Farm Bureau and the IRS, and yet somehow they put it together.
Do you remember the junk?
Yeah.
Do you remember that car?
Remember the what?
The car was just the frame and had the seat. You could hang on the back. There was no body. They used it on the farm to drive around.
To drive around?
Pick stuff up, yeah.
Wow.
But there was no body on it.
It was a nice place to grow up. And, it was like 5 Salemmes who lived right around there.
Yeah.
And we were like our own little neighborhood. And we were also kind of removed from the rest of Orange, too. Yeah, so it was a nice, we had our own little enclave there.
Do you remember growing up, it being colder, starting in like Halloween and staying much
A lot
longer?
more snow.
Yeah,
A
climate.
lot of snow, because I remember they had talked about that,
In fact, my father told me the town used to hire them to shovel
to shovel Marshall Road.
Marshall Road down to Indian River Road.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he said as they would shovel,
Yeah.
the other families would come out and meet them, and they'd all
Really?
go down so that the road was clear.
I didn't know that.
There's a photograph in the history of Orange with Catil Pasillo in front of the car, but there's also, I think it's in that book as well, of, it's over 12 feet. And they had to dig through that, yeah.
When you mentioned the farmers having to deal with all the bureaucrats, you forgot the FBI.
Yeah.
Oh,
Tell the story, Tom. Tell the story.
No, it was during Depression, Prohibition.
Prohibition.
And, you had to make a little extra money, and a couple of the barns, and you know the rest.
Well, I
They were-
remember Junie talking about that one situation, because when Freddie Pasillo died, and the same with my grandfather, same with all of them, they got through the Depression paying the taxes for the land by a still. And the connection was Bradley Point in West Haven and taking it into New York. Because I can remember hearing stories of my grandmother with a little, what do they call it, the baby stroller? And she had the blanket over it with gallons of the booze to go to the speakeasies. And before Freddie died, about a year before, he was telling me, he said, yeah, that's still, everybody had one. That was your fail-safe. Otherwise, if you couldn't pay your taxes, you lost your farm. But I just, one instance, I guess, they had to still it in Junie's barn, and the father was alive, he knew what was going on, but word got out somehow, somebody came, the FBI is coming, and so his father threw water on his face, ran up into the bedroom, threw the covers over, and the story was, Junie's mother, his wife was supposed to say he's been sick, doesn't know what's going on. Well, the FBI did come into the house, and he's just, I'm sick. So the FBI agent didn't want to get close enough to get whatever he had, and he bought it and didn't go into the barn. When Junie's told that story, and Freddie said, yeah, I remember what was going on, because Freddie had stayed on the farm until he was 25. I mean, that was a long, long time. But he said also that what they used to do, in New Haven, there was a place called Spurian Barns. And what it was a slaughterhouse and a meatpacking company. So you worked on your farm and you arranged to work there in the winter. But they were making like $300, $320 a week in the 30s, which was unheard of. So you were able to, that's how they were able to get their tractor. That's how they were able to get what was going on, because they'd have to rent Buckholz with his horses to do the plowing. Otherwise, and they talked about when they had gotten the first tractor, how it just changed everything. Just changed everything. And there was a way to harness the gear so you could hook up like a conveyor belt to load anything you needed in the silo. And if you remember the Pasillos, they still had the silo because of the cows, but also on the hay into the barn. So between the Pasillos and the Farinas with the irrigation and the new tractor, it really was a modern marvel for the time. It really was. Very impressed to hear the stories, though. It was cold. It came in Halloween, stayed to April. You could leave the meat hanging. In 1959, Junie said he saw a moose walking up. And I said, the story here really should be titled Of Stone Walls and Wood Smoke. I mean, that's really, because he talked about, you didn't worry about the Depression as long as you had tax money for the land, because you heated with wood. You grew what you needed to eat, and you canned. Everybody canned. That was something you did. There was deer to harvest, and you talked about Vaughan. Vaughan used to raise pheasants for the state, and they used to escape. And so the Pasillos farm and the Farinas farms, they used to have pheasants. So they had a whole population. So when I entered this at 5, my big thing was to see the season around. You planted, you hunted, you fished. That's what you did, and save your money, because it wasn't how much you made, it was how much you saved. That was the big lesson. And I remember I was really impressed with this, because then, in those days, in the 50s, everybody would go to Maine and they'd bring back deer, and there was a big day when you hung your deer and you were butchering. Even then, the Pasillos had pigs, where Gale West is, and then before there, you guys raised pigs. They used to, I remember the cooked garbage when I was little, smelling it like a mile away. And you raised pigs, I mean, this is what you did. So you were there for the slaughter, but you were never far from that seasonal ground. You followed what was going on in the spring, in the fall harvest. Winter was the time to get everything together. And Jimmy had said, when he was in school, he had to make the soup bunches. Because that's the only thing you could sell, that's all that was left. So I was very, very lucky to have that period of time and to hear the stories and for a little while learn what was going on. I have to agree with you. I think growing up in that time was a better time to grow up. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any like really good old stories or stuff you can
Remember
pick?
Nonny's watch dogs, which were the geese?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
They were nasty.
They were meaner than any
They were
dogs.
really nasty. The gentleman that would bring the bread,
Yeah, yeah.
oh, he wouldn't even want to get out of the truck because the geese would come charging at them. They were nasty.
Well, he would run.
He would run. They were
Yeah.
really nasty. They'd bite. Oh, they were cruel.
And that's another thing, there were a lot of services that came to the farms.
Yes, yes.
You know, and that was something else that nobody now is familiar with, where people
Or
would show
go
up.
get
and-
eggs.
Mhm.
I used to go with Aunt Dorothy to get the eggs for the family.
Right.
And we would go and get all the eggs.
The wicker
Dozens and
furniture.
dozens. Yes.
Right.
Guy would come with a wicker furniture truck,
Mhm.
loaded
Really?
with chairs.
Wow.
No kidding.
And you just, I'll take that one, you know.
Now, you talked about Sundays and the good times and so on. What's the earliest memory you have?
Me just going on a Sunday,
How old you were, about 9, 8, 9? Or earlier?
I guess we always went, but I don't remember
Mhm.
when I was 2, 3, or 4. I think we always went to grandmother's on Sunday. And all my grandmother's kids were there, my aunts, my uncles. And she had this big, the longest kitchen table I ever seen in my life. Do you remember that?
Mhm. And
And,
children gave birth on that table.
well, I didn't know what
Yes,
it
she
was
did.
for, but.
Yeah, yeah.
She cleaned
Some
it
of her
anyway.
children on that table.
Well, that I didn't know.
Yes.
But all I knew is the women, my aunts and mother, would sit at this end and have their tea and coffee and dessert. And the men sit on this end playing
Separate.
pinochle.
Separate.
There was
Interesting.
never any arguing. There was never a raised voice. I mean, everybody just always got along.
What do you remember, Tom, being at Nonny's house on the farm?
Yeah,
What's
the
your
earliest,
first memory?
See.
earliest memory.
I'm the older generation and they were the next. We had 2 sets of cousins.
That's
Yeah.
great.
My
That's
age
great.
group and their age group.
That's great. So what do you remember, Tom?
Yeah, pretty much what we've been saying. I remember eating a lot of strawberries, a lot of raspberries, a lot of cousins.
And we never ran out of cousins.
Never ran out of cousins, no, no. Yeah, the Sundays, that's, you know, the main thing,
Yeah, they were
Yeah.
special.
yeah.
Sunday at grandma's.
Sunday, it was-
How about you, Gary? What do you
I
remember?
remember being shooed away from the well.
I didn't have to be shooed away, I just stayed away.
What do you remember?
I remember when we canned tomatoes, or,
Yes.
well, our parents, grandparents canned tomatoes.
Yeah.
And we have a picture of Tommy and Joey and myself, and we're covered in tomatoes, but I just remember the smell of them, and how everybody it was just kind of like a system, everybody knew what they were doing, you know, it was
Yeah.
kind of
All
a
around.
social time, but a work time also. And on another note, I do agree with you that I think the kids today have so much of a harder time just being kids.
Mhm.
Because my memories of Halloween were always so great, you know, we'd go out, we'd go to all the different houses, and everybody would open the door and just, you know, give you
Yeah.
candy, or give you fruit, or give you whatever, and there was never had a mask on, you never had to say, well, we can't go to that house. Although we did have a house on the hill, further up on Marsh Hill, the twin men
Collins?
did not like any trick-or-treaters, so that house we would kind of hide on doorbell night, go ring the bell, and then run for our lives.
Getting even, huh?
Yeah.
One of the Collins brothers used to let me take their tractor and ride around. One day I got it stuck in mud. How do you get a tractor stuck in mud?
Call me, I'll tell you.
They weren't happy.
I can remember sitting on the back. We have pictures of the back of the house. We don't have any pictures of the front
No,
of the
nothing ever
house.
happened before.
No, it didn't,
No.
we were saying about the plants on the porch, but sitting on the back, on the steps there, and Nonnie would get me a stick of rhubarb, and she'd peel it off for
You
me.
ate rhubarb?
Oh, I ate it. She would give me a cup of sugar, and I'd sit on the
Rhubarb's delicious.
second or third step,
Delicious.
and I'd be dipping
Yeah.
it in, and I'd have my rhubarb and sugar, dipping it in, and I
Okay,
was
I
probably
have a
5
trivia
years old.
question. So Anthony Greco won a national contest, he won a horse.
That's
Does
right.
anybody remember that?
I remember the horse because it was in the barn in the back.
But do you remember his name?
The horse's name?
The horse's name. That's how he won. I forget what the,
He had a name of the horse, that's his
yeah,
name.
the best name for the horse.
And that's how we won.
And I remember when they brought the horse back then.
What was the name of the horse?
I'm not gonna tell
I
you.
don't know.
Silhouette.
I don't remember all this.
Silhouette.
Do you remember the grandfather? He
Oh.
walked down the middle of Marsh Hill Road.
Yeah, with a
Right in the
stick.
middle of the road with a
Bust over
stick.
it,
And the cars would
Bust
beep
over
and he'd go, ah.
yeah.
So we'd
Oh,
say,
grandfather?
the
Greco.
Greco's
Greco's.
grandfather.
Oh,
And
my
then
grandfather never got off
I
of
said,
the
what are you
horse.
doing? He goes, I hear before the cars.
That's funny. I can remember the first meal at Freddie Basilo's, and he was always working on tractors. You know, his history is famous for the tractor pulls here. But always, and later on, we used to go to Maine, maybe 7, 8 years ago, and look for, he had this uncanny ability of finding a tractor that's just got the seat somewhere just above the mud. We'd be walking through, and he'd find out who owned that tractor, and the next thing you know, it'd be on his trailer and be back here, and he'd rebuild it that year. Unbelievable. I can remember, though, his mother, just a pile of freshly prepared corn, a big pot of stew, and it must have been pork, I guess, because they had the pigs, and this incredible lemonade. And I don't know if it was because I was little or what, but the biggest container I had ever seen at that time, and the best lemonade ever. And it's funny how those tastes and those associations stick with you, but I can always remember that. And many years later, his father, this was after his mother died, I had a horse. I was living in West Haven for a short time, and I had a horse, and he came to get the manure, but I made him stay so I'd get another story. That was the price of the manure. So yeah, and what was happening with our meetings, it went down to 3, and then one year we lost Bobby Farina, we lost Anthony Salemme, we lost Freddie with a span of 4 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it was done. And then, of course, the Farina sold the house, and now it's a hotel.
Yeah, the last one was Freddie's birthday.
Yeah, it was at a button ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I made this strawberry cake. It was March 5th was his birthday.
Yeah.
Almost coming up. And we had it, and then Mario Farina, Bobby's son, was there, and you were there, and you gave him a farmwell hat. And
That's
that was the
great.
last one we had. Yeah, that was the last one.
And of course, the neighborhood now is all different. The town zoned it differently, wiped out the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Are
On
any
that
of the
side of
houses
the
still
post
there?
road.
I haven't driven up there. Are any of the houses still there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Although supposedly, I think I heard that there was a motel going there on the corner of Salemme Lane, Marsh Hill Road.
Oh, really? Another
That's what
one?
I think
Another
your
one?
sister told me that.
Another one, just what we need.
Right, I don't know.
I hope not.
No, I haven't heard that
No.
yet. No, I think when they were talking about the train coming through the train station,
Right.
that's when it was a
Yeah.
Oh,
whole.
big battles, train
Oh,
station,
remember
Stu
your
Leonard's.
Your father with
Yeah,
Stu Leonard's,
signatures.
that was a disappointment.
I saw a
And
video
also,
of my father.
The train station was a disappointment. After $6 million, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
That was
They
terrible.
should have put Stu
That
Leonard's
was
in. They
terrible.
ended up putting the Christmas tree shop in, but they wouldn't put Stu Leonard's in.
Well, that was right after the father got arrested for
Yeah,
double
that was a little
booking.
touchy there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little touchy there.
He was a little pushy.
I still have the petition. Remember
Yeah.
we went
Oh, yeah,
around
yeah,
getting
yeah.
the signatures of all the people
Yeah.
who were against it, Stu Leonard's, and I still have all the signatures, pages
You
and
didn't like
pages
Stu
of
Leonard's?
signatures. No,
And now we have FedEx.
Got the Christmas tree
that
shop.
was way out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow I
My
think it's
father
much
was
less.
I was at the train station, and the first electric
Right, right.
was Mitch.
Mitch Goldblatt.
All that, yeah.
I would go for
So
me.
we'd go in to
I
meet
don't
with
know if
Mitch,
that's
and he delivered a nightshade, wear his old kind of raincoat, shuffle in. They had their fun political times.
Well, farmers usually do, and that's what's great about them. They've got a great sense of humor, definitely.
Yeah, I think that worldview that I take with me and hopefully will remember is constant as a North Star.
Yeah.
It'll work itself out. There's always next year. And
Well,
I wouldn't have
that's-
learned that. I wouldn't have learned that if I
That's a
hadn't
definite,
those
yeah.
decades with the Thursday meetings.
The crop is bad this year, then you just look forward automatically to next year, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, that is awesome. I mean,
Thank you.
just,